Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is 12 o'clock, so I'm going to kick us off. This is the next webinar in our Incubeta Ignite virtual learning series, and today's webinar is on the importance of lifetime value, which I hope you're really excited about. Before we get started and I pass off to our amazing speakers, just a couple housekeeping things. The first is we should be running about 30 minutes, but we might go a little over. If we go over and you need to jump off to another call or at any point needs to leave, we are recording today's session and we will share it with you afterwards. If you've got any questions, there's a chat over to your right. Please feel free to put them in and we will answer them at the end during our question section. Now, to introduce you to our amazing speakers today, I'm very excited to say we have Ian Estabrook, Platforms Account Manager at Google, joining us today. He's been with Google's for about 6 years, and if his accent sounds a bit American, that would be because he is from Chicago. Also, we have Chris Berger, who is the Managing Consultant at our sister company, DQ&A. He is known by his colleagues as Berger. This was due to an unfortunate typo, so I do highly recommend you call him Berger. He might kill me for that. Now, now I'm going to pass over to Ian, who is going to get us started with an introduction to lifetime value. Thank you so much, Ian.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. We know that your time is valuable while you're working from home, so we are grateful that you've chosen to spend some of that time with us. We hope that it's going to make it worth your while. So it's a privilege for me to be presenting alongside my partners and friends here at Incubeta and DQ&A. So as Lisa said, let's kick things off with an introduction to lifetime value. So I want to start today's session with a strong statement, as well as pose a question to all of you in the room. So you're going to see an option to vote coming up on your screen in a moment. So agree or disagree. Not all customers are created equal. So I'm going to give everyone just a minute to cast your vote, and we'll take a look at the results together when they come in. Okay, great. An overwhelming majority. Everyone in the room agrees. This is pretty much how I thought things would shake out. So most of us agree with this statement, right? Not all customers are created equal. There are going to be certain tiers, buckets, segments, groups, however you choose to define them, of customers that will more or less effectively drive your end business outcomes. And the value of a customer is going to vary based on their past, present, and predicted future engagement and purchase behaviors with you and your company. So this is more easily understood through a popular theory known as the Pareto principle, which you may have heard commonly referred to as the 80-20 rule. So this rule states that 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes. So in the case of your customers, we could rework this statement to say 80% of our desirable end business outcomes, such as profit, come from 20% of our customers. Now, obviously, it's not going to be an exact split. The results are going to vary based on individual businesses, but the general idea is that businesses are going to have pockets of customers that drive a disproportionate share of returns for them, and they should thus be treated as higher value. And when you start to look at your audiences like this, it's a step towards what's known as customer centricity. So Jim Stern, who's the founder and chairman of the Web Analytics Association, described customer centricity as a method to reveal how to increase profits from your best customers, how to find more customers like them, and avoid over-investing in the rest. And that last part is pretty pertinent because we're going to be covering some practical examples of that later on in the presentation. So now that we all seem to be in the proper mindset around customer centricity, the value of a customer, and we understand a little bit more of the theory behind lifetime value, I'm going to pass it over to Chris, who is going to walk us through some practical applications of lifetime value. Chris?
Great, thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. So it's Chris here from DQ&A. So I'm going to be taking you through some applications of lifetime value. So we're going to start off with focusing on sales-based businesses. So where we have direct revenue data from sales made on site. So for example, an online clothing store. The next is lead gen. So we're going to take you through examples of sites where customers might not necessarily make direct purchases on a site, but instead they might do something like filling out a get quote form for an insurance site, for example. And finally, we'll look at content-based businesses. So businesses that rely on other revenue streams, such as ad revenue or external funding. So for example, a government-owned company like Money Advice Service or The Guardian. So, cool. So start off with sales-based businesses. So the simplest way we can actually calculate customer lifetime value is by creating segments in Google Analytics. So doing this, we can bucket users into groups of varying value based on the number of purchases for a customer and the revenue for those purchases as well. So for example, here you have a high value segment set up for customers who've completed more than 5 transactions, who've spent over $1,000 with your brand. You can also create sort of medium and lower value segments to bucket all those users into these before creating audiences off the back of those. So again, this is it. This is lifetime value in its most sort of simple form. So the problem with this is that it's actually purely based on past behavior of users. So we're not doing any prediction at all. Okay, so customers who are valuable in the past may not always be valuable in the future. Also, just focusing on the number of transactions and revenue for customer won't give you a very good indication of how valuable a customer might turn out to be in the future. So a step up from this is something called RFM modeling. So with RFM, we can actually rate customers based on the nature of their behavior and spending habits. Also allows us to actually predict lifetime value for our customers. Cool. So the factors included in RFM modeling are recency, frequency, and monetary value. So recency is how recently a customer interacted with your brand or made a purchase. Frequency is how often a customer interacts with your brand. Monetary value is the final one, which is basically the sum of all the purchases made by that customer on your site. Okay, so once you've actually worked out, once we know these values, we can actually apply a score for each of these. So for recency, frequency, and monetary, apply a score for each of those 3 signals, and that'll actually give us our current lifetime value for that user, so our current and past lifetime value. So for example, this user here visits our site fairly regularly, but hasn't done for a while, and they're also a big spender when they do visit. So for this user, we might apply a score of 18 out of 30 or 6 out of 10. Cool. So once you've calculated the lifetime value in the same way for a set of customers, so in this example, for all logged in users, we can calculate the average lifetime value for that set, which in this case would be 6.5 out of 10. Cool. So during the lifespan of a campaign, we can actually recalculate that or recalculate lifetime value at specific points in time to get the average lifetime value at different points. So once we've done that, we can actually apply predictive modeling techniques to forecast lifetime value for those customers, just kind of shown on the right here. Okay, cool. So this example just shows multiple basically customer groups. So at the top, we have our 6.5 out of 10, our logged in users. The next might be new logged in users. Then we could have logged out users, etc., etc. So once you have lifetime value calculated for all these different user types that you have defined, then what can you actually do with that information? So one use case for this is to save money by reallocating your media spend based on customer type. So without lifetime value applied, we have a flat marketing spend across all user types, shown on the left here. So this means we could be overspending on low value users and not spending enough on those who are more likely to become higher value users in future, higher value customers in future. So this is shown on the left here, where you have missed opportunity and overinvestment. So once we actually apply lifetime value to these groups and predict how valuable a user is going to be. We can actually we can reallocate budgets to save money on marketing spend on users that are likely to not be that interested in our brand. And we can also use the budget we save to increase the marketing spend on estimated higher value users.
I just want to say, I really like the example that Chris is highlighting here. It's actually a callback to that Jim Stern quote from before, right? Like reallocating spend to the rest and not over-investing on the rest. And the value of this is actually going to become fairly obvious when we talk about the flow of data from collection to analysis and all the way up to activation. So as Chris said, once we have a good LTV strategy in place, it can actually start to change our approach to a lot of different marketing plans. So like media planning, channel use, even like product selection strategy, right? So again, just want to say, I really like this example by Chris, and we're going to see the value of this even more in a bit later on in the presentation.
Thanks, Ian. Cool. So next up, we're going to talk about a lead gen example. So we covered the sales-based stuff. Right. So it's the same rules apply. So frequency is frequency, recency is recency. But how do we get that monetary value? So the idea is that we will actually combine your CRM data with data in or your web analytics data in GA or Adobe Analytics, whatever you use. So this example shows Anna getting a quote for home insurance online and before completing the purchase actually over the phone to separately from the site. So as long as there's some kind of common ID between something like GA and CRM data. So in this example, we're using user ID, which is your kind of CRM ID used for cross-device tracking. And we can actually attribute the value of those purchases that were made offline back to Anna, and then we can apply that to our RFM modeling as well. So exactly like I said before, so recency and frequency stay the same with monetary values being pulled from your CRM. This should actually say how recently the customer has interacted with your brand rather than made a purchase, because we don't actually have purchases on this site in this example. So yeah, this technique can actually already be applied across sales businesses as well, sales-based businesses. So just because I didn't mention it in the example before doesn't mean it's not possible. So you can further enrich your sales-based RFM with CRM data as well to include offline purchases over the phone or even made in store. Okay, so our last example is content-only sites. So these are sites that don't necessarily drive customers towards a purchase on site, but they actually rely on either external funding or ad revenue to keep the lights on. So again, how do we actually calculate the monetary value for customers who can't purchase anything on our site? There are a couple of ways we can do it. So first of all, if your site serves ads, then ad revenue might be key to your business. So therefore, the quantity of ads a user sees and their time spent in view can be used to determine a user's monetary value, so indirectly as like a proxy. Okay, so for example, you could actually use site engagement metrics as a proxy for how much exposure a user actually gets to ads on your site. So using things like page depth, so how many pages are viewed on your site, how long a user spends on your site, the scroll depth, so how far they make it through the page, are all things that can kind of have a direct correlation with how many ads a user sees and for how long. So to take this a step further as well, so rather than using a proxy, you can also pass in your Google Ad Manager data via the direct integration with Google Analytics. What that allows you to do is incorporate things like number of impressions, viewability, and actually CPC as well. So the cost per click that you make from displaying an ad on your site, and that can be applied into that RFM model again as your monetary value for that. So again, these examples are just to kind of show you that it's possible to calculate RFM and lifetime value even if you don't even sell anything on your site. So everyone should be thinking about lifetime value. I think now I'm going to pass you back to Ian.
Yep, thanks, Chris. So now that we've covered some applications of lifetime value across different business verticals through varying levels of sophistication, and hopefully busted some myths, right, around who can use LTV and who should be thinking about LTV. Let's take a look at how LTV fits in the context of your overall marketing maturity. So many of you in the room probably remember the joint study between the Boston Consulting Group and Google a few years ago, which looked at organizations' digital marketing maturity and its impact on performance. The study found that there were 4 kind of benchmarks for digital marketing maturity: nascent, emerging, connected, and multi-moment. And the study found that companies that achieved multi-moment maturity reported cost savings of up to 30% and increases of revenue of up to 20%. So given these results, it makes sense to say that the more mature your marketing, the better your outcomes will be. So I see a couple of you have already started voting in the poll. So I want to pose a question to the room again. Where do you see yourself, if you're an individual marketing practitioner, your company, or your agency, in terms of maturity along this curve? So let's give like another moment or so just for people to vote. And then we'll take a look at the results and have a quick discussion about it. Perfect. Okay. So yeah, pretty much I think what we expected, right? So we have sort of like a fairly normal distribution. So the majority of you, roughly 40% split, are between emerging and connected. And there's a couple of you in the room that feel like your kind of digital marketing maturity sits more in that nascent bucket kind of towards the bottom there. Doesn't look like many people, if any, feel like they're at that multi-moment level, which makes sense. There's only really single-digit percentage in terms of the total pool of marketers that the study looked at that were there. So this seems to mirror the output of the Boston Consulting Group study, which is good. So applying LTV to your digital marketing strategy, kind of regardless of where you are in your overall marketing maturity, is a great way for you to not only begin getting more value out of your customer data and return on investment from your campaigns, but it can also help increase the overall sophistication and maturity of your organization as a whole. For those of you that said that you might sit in that like nascent or emerging buckets, definitely don't be discouraged, because taking these steps towards applying LTV doesn't necessarily have to be complicated. So for example, earlier on, Chris took us through an example that exists natively in Google Analytics 360, right? You can start by leveraging site and user data that you already have in Google Analytics and create audience lists based on transaction and revenue, right? That's a very simple in-UI solution that already exists for you to start thinking about and applying LTV for your business. If you want to get a little bit more sophisticated and take it a step further, you can combine that data with your CRM or other offline data sources to build a more robust, holistic picture of your customer's LTV. So in the previous example, you might have got like a customer lifetime value output of, we'll say like $100, but when you combine it via stitching together user IDs with other extraneous data sources, that customer's lifetime value goes from potentially like $100 all the way to $240, right? A much more accurate picture of your total lifetime value. So the takeaway here is that there are several ways to get started. There are several products, both in the platform and outside of it, to help you. And doing so is not just good for you as a marketer, but it's also good for your customers. So now that we understand how LTV fits into your overall marketing maturity and how easy it can be to get started, I'm going to pass it back over to Chris, who is going to take us through some more advanced applications of LTV through a product called CRMInt. Chris?
Hello again. Cool. Yeah, so as Ian says, I'm going to take you through a quick demo, just basically showing a basic lifetime value pipeline within something called CRMInt. First of all, what is CRMInt? So CRMInt is a client-side application for scheduling data flow between first-party data with Google products. So basically what this means is it's a quick and easy way to move data between platforms. Like we discussed earlier on, there's diagrams to generate lifetime value for your customers. So where does CRMInt fit into what we've been talking about? So it kind of sits in the middle here as like an orchestration tool, which basically allows us to schedule jobs, so automated jobs, periodically on our data, and actually upload that information back into GMP for actioning as well.
Yeah, and I just want to say this slide is a really good representation of that data flow point I made earlier on, right? You can sort of see how all of the stages of the data lifecycle are represented. So you've got collection on the leftmost side, through online sales data or on-site behavioral data from GA360. You can combine that with offline data like CRM information, analyze it right in a product like CRMInt, segment it into those audiences that are pushed into GA360. And then finally, you can activate those audiences of a lifetime value across different buy-side products. So for example, maybe you want to activate these LTV audiences across certain publishers in DV360 have historically given you good performance on your campaigns. Or maybe on the search side, right? You want to dial up your search campaign efforts in SA360 or Google Ads by bidding more on high LTV audiences because it brings more future value as opposed to present campaign value for you. So whatever your use case may be, the rubber really meets the road when you activate these LTV audiences in these buy-side products. And it's an effective way to improve not only your return on results, return on investment from your campaigns, but also match marketing relevance to end business outcomes. So sort of bridging that gap. So anyway, I want to toss it back to Chris here, who's going to help bring things home for us.
Cheers. Thanks, Ian. Cool. So before we actually get stuck into the demo, there's a couple of assumptions we made, well, in terms of what you already have set up as prerequisites. So first of all, you need to be exporting your GA data to BigQuery, which should take you around 1 or 2 hours, depending on your experience with GCP and GA. So the 2-hour mark would be more if it's the first time you're coming to do this kind of stuff. So the second assumption is that you will have deployed CRMInt and set it up. So there are really easy steps to follow. I've done a lot of this kind of stuff before, but just coming to the repository where it's stored, the instructions took about 5 minutes to do. I didn't have to do any thinking at all. It's just a case of copying in some commands into a shell. So can't stress enough how simple it is to set it up. So it'll be about 10 minutes to deploy it, about 10 minutes to configure it, to link to all of your different platforms, and then it takes about 30 minutes to actually deploy that onto GCP for you. And finally, we would have expected you to have configured a data import in GA360. So this is on the receiving end. So after you've calculated your lifetime value through CRMInt, there's a function to upload that into GA360. You need an endpoint. So basically what you're saying is we're expecting to receive, maybe in this example, a list of user IDs, and then also a lifetime value metric as well alongside that. So that's what you're telling GA to kind of expect. So that's another thing that we've set up to kind of prep for this demo. So overall, it would take about like 2 to 3 hours to actually do all this stuff. I think we might do an accompanying blog alongside this webinar. If not, we'll just include all the resources you'd need to get this stuff set up in the description. Here we go. So here we have CRMInt after you had it all set up and done those prerequisites you mentioned before. So this is your pipeline view. This is our basic pipeline we've set up for NMPI's GA. It's kind of a GDPR nightmare to take you through this because there's a lot of sensitive information, so I can't show you everything, but I'll try and show you as much as I can without giving too much away. So in this view, you can create new pipelines, or you can even import pipelines from a JSON template. So you can download existing pipelines and pass them on to other people to import into their CRMInt. And you can set up your authentication against all of your other platforms in the settings menu up here, which I'm definitely not going to show you. Cool. So checking out our first pipeline. There we go. So this is basically our pipeline as a whole. There are 3 kind of simple steps to it. So we want to first of all run our RFM query. So what we talked about earlier on in the slides, to actually take recency and frequency and monetary value from our users in our GA data within BigQuery. Run that query to output our list of users and our list of lifetime value against those users. And then what we do is we actually import that file or export that file out to Google Cloud Storage, which is basically an online bucket where you can store files in GCP. And then the final step is to actually import that data into Google Analytics for that endpoint that we mentioned earlier on. So there are lots of options here. You can either run the pipeline as a whole. I'm not going to do that in the example. It takes a while to run the RFM query. You can also edit the pipeline. So That just includes things like setting the schedule. So it's done through something called cron notation. There's some information here if you want to look into that. I won't cover it now, but basically this schedule was set to run at midnight every day. So it gives you a little description underneath as and when you change the schedule here. You can also get notifications about your pipeline and any errors that happened, or whether or not it's successfully run and push data through as expected. And you can name the pipeline too. Cool. So just to give you an example without going into our own configuration. So I'm going to show you how you would run an RFM query. So how you do this is you create a job on the top right. You can name your job, run query. Then you have this list of worker classes. So this is basically your job types, and this contains a full comprehensive list of all the things that CRMInt can do in terms of connectors. So you have things like a BigQuery ML trainer, machine learning, BigQuery launcher, BigQuery query launcher. You can also use a GA data importer. So that's what we're going to be using today. So I'm just going to select BQ query launcher. So you can also add dependencies. So you can say, I only want this job to run when a specific other job is already run. So that's how we get that pipeline built up. So this is where you'll put your query. So this is where we actually entered in our query to run RFM modeling across our BigQuery data sets. And then you also specify your output. So where you want to push that file, which has been created before it's actually pushed out to Google Cloud Storage. Okay, so like I said, I'm not going to run the full thing, but we'll just run the last step here. So as you can pick and choose any jobs you actually want to run individually as well, which is quite useful for debugging, etc. Cool, so that's completed. You can check logs to see your past runs. You can also actually select this to run it on that schedule we set earlier on. I'm going to have to unshare and then reshare. In a different window now. So you'll see we have an import here yesterday, Star Wars Day. Now if I refresh this, we should see another file which has just been uploaded. So that was our lifetime value file into Google Analytics. So you can see the time is 12:30, which is current time here. So once that's been uploaded, you should be able to see your custom data, which is your lifetime value, alongside either your client IDs, so your cookie IDs in GA, or user IDs. So that's how you'd actually build audiences off the back of those values, which are imported as high, medium, or low, or more granular than that. And then once you created those segments, you can push those audiences out to your GMP platforms, as Ian mentioned before. I think that's pretty much it for the demo. Go back to the slides. Cool. So come to questions.
Thank you both so much. I hope everybody who is watching got a lot out of that. There is time to ask questions, so if you want to put anything over into the chat on the right, please do. But before we get started with our guest questions, I've got one for you. If I don't have access to products like BigQuery, can LTV still work?
I can take that one. Yeah, definitely, right? Like, I think some of the practical examples that Chris walked us through earlier showcase that, LTV doesn't have to be a very technically complex part of your marketing strategy or your organization's approach to customer data. You can simply use, existing in-UI segmentation solutions, like building those audience segments in GA360, for example. Now, obviously, you get a lot more insights out of combining it with products like BigQuery or offline data from your CRM. And the nice thing is that GA360 actually has some natively built-in functions for both of those. So you have a data import, right, for that offline CRM data, so you can bring that in and start combining it with your existing on-site analytics data. For GA360 users, we also have a BigQuery export, right, that lets you export your analytics data into BigQuery if you want to get set up with that. The actual maintenance and storage of BigQuery is not too cost-intensive either. Neither is really running queries. So it definitely could be something you look into as an organization. But to answer your question, no, it's definitely not a necessity, and LTV can absolutely still work for you. It just depends on the level that you're at.
Amazing, thank you so much. And we've got a question from Scarlett. Why use CRMInt over an existing automation tool like Airflow?
Cool. So, it kind of, how long is a piece of string? It depends what you want to do. So if I'd say the CRMInt is a lot quicker and easier to set up than something like Airflow or a lot of other automation frameworks. The difference is it's very Google centric. So it depends on what you want to do with your pipeline. So I'd say sit down and think a lot about what platforms you're going to incorporate into a pipeline, or what platforms you might want to in future, and then decide on your solution based on that. And so, for example, if you wanted to push this information out into Adobe Analytics instead, you might want to go with something like Airflow over CRMInt, because that's not built in natively into the framework.
Great. So we are running slightly over. If there's any questions we haven't gotten to, we will be sure to follow up with the answers afterwards. But thank you both, Ian and Chris, for joining us today. It was really interesting. And we will follow up with everybody with the video recording probably tomorrow. So keep an eye out for it, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you both so much. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Bye-bye.
All right.